Hello everyone and welcome to another short tutorial. As you can see, it's dark outside. I'm in the area around Frankfurt am Main, Germany, and today I would like to show you how you can turn the night into day with your camera. The purpose of this short tutorial is how to expose correctly during the night. Today I have the Canon EOS R6 with me, together with the RF 24-105 and the 70-200mm 2.8. My aim is to give you an idea how to get the best image quality during the night. It doesn't matter which camera you have, the main thing is that you have a manual mode to expose correctly. Let's get started. That's my tripod I'm gonna use today to show you how to expose correctly. It's available for about 100 to 130 bucks. It looks heavier and bigger than it actually is. It's a really good travel tripod. I can highly recommend to use a monopod or a tripod when shooting during the night, just to get the best image quality for a long exposure. So everyone, here's my Canon EOS R6 and the 70-200mm 2.8. I turned on my camera, I switched to this kind of focus field, and as you can see, the shutter speed is at a 1/6 of a second. Aperture is at 5.6, ISO 100. If I take a picture now, let me show you what's gonna happen. Nothing. You don't see anything. Let me show you what's gonna happen if I use a longer exposure time. Let's say 30 seconds with the same settings. Make sure once you take a picture with an exposure time of 30 seconds, you're not gonna move around your camera like my cat, which is always following me here on the field for whatever reason. So here is the tripod. Make sure there's no train passing by, no car passing by, and you're not walking by this tripod, because otherwise your picture will not be sharp. So I'm gonna stand still, and that's how the picture looks like at the moment. We exposed this photo for 30 seconds. Here's the aperture, ISO, and as you can see, we took this picture in RAW. There's also the chance that you take it in JPEG. I will take all my pictures in RAW, and I took all my pictures also in RAW, because it gives me more opportunities for post-editing. If you're not into post-editing and you just want to have a great picture, feel free to use JPEG as your format. As you can see, it's quite dark still. So what can we do to have a little bit more light in that picture? Of course, this lens here allows me to use a faster aperture. Of course, you don't have a fast aperture on all lenses, because that makes a lens expensive. Let's say you're just starting with photography and you don't have a lens with a 2.8 aperture, you can use a higher ISO setting. The aim is always to be as low as possible with your ISO settings, because the more you push the ISO, the worse your image quality gets. It will get a little bit grainy, let's call it this way. So if I use now an ISO setting of 102,400, I will have a grainy picture, which I will show you in a second. I will leave it at the moment at ISO 800, same aperture and ISO 800, aperture 5.6, and we still use the same exposure time of 30 seconds. Let's see what we get. After 30 seconds standing still, here is the image. As you can see, much better, well illuminated. There's some artificial light coming out of this section here, but apart from that, it looks really cool. And here's the picture that we took before. The 2.8 aperture allows me that there's more light passing now through the lens on my camera sensor, and therefore I can go down with the ISO a little bit, and let's see what we get if we use an ISO setting of 320, 2.8 aperture, and still the same exposure time. 30 seconds, 2.8, ISO 320. That's what we get. Still a great image quality. And to be honest, I wouldn't worry too much about ISO settings between 100 and even 3200, depends also on the Canon or on the camera sensor. If you have a full frame camera, the better the low light performance will be. If you have an APS-C sensor, try to keep the ISO setting as low as possible. And as you can see, looks great. Let's assume that you don't have a tripod with you and you want to take that picture out of your hands. I wouldn't necessarily recommend to use a faster exposure time than a 30 or a 20th of a second, and therefore you really need the 2.8 aperture or even a faster aperture, because right now you wouldn't see anything, to be honest. I can take that picture. See, it's dark. What can we do? We can't go faster on the aperture because it's already at its fastest aperture, 2.8 on this lens here. I can push the ISO. Therefore, it will decrease the image quality if I now use the maximum setting of 102,400. If I zoom into that picture, it looks really grainy, not sharp anymore, and that's why you better try to avoid high ISO settings, and therefore I can always recommend to use a tripod once shooting during the night. So let's go back on the ISO setting. Let's use an ISO setting of 1000, or let's even say 1600. Let's say you have only a lens with an aperture of f4 and you have a tripod with you, so therefore you can expose obviously a little bit longer. Let's use an exposure time of 13 seconds. 13 seconds, aperture 4, ISO 1600. Let's have a look at this one. It's sharp, it looks great, and looks kind of the one that we took a while ago using a lower ISO setting, therefore faster aperture and a longer exposure time. So as you can see, there are many ways to get to the perfect image. What I can recommend is to use the manual mode basically at all times, because you will learn more once shooting in manual mode. The camera always tries something. I have no idea what the camera is doing, and therefore I try to avoid the auto mode. Obviously, in the first 2 months, once I had my first camera, I was shooting at all times in auto mode. But after a while I said, no, why isn't the image or the photo looking like this or like that, whatever. And therefore I came to the idea to try out everything, and now I'm sharing here my knowledge with you. And what I can say is, once shooting during the night, try to avoid high ISO settings. 1600 on this camera is nothing. I can also go up to, let's say, 3200, and it wouldn't make that much of a difference. Therefore I can use a slower shutter speed, let's say 8 seconds, and it will still give me a great result. Now to the last part of this video. That is an idea I had 10 years ago or something. So we're going to expose now for 30 seconds. We're using now an aperture of 5.6, and that's just a goodie for you. ISO back to 200, and I will switch now to the manual focus. It's better if you do that together. So if you have a partner who's like telling you where to stay, it's much better to do this kind of photography, that which I will show you now. I think I might be 5 to 7 meters away from the camera, and I have a torch with me now, and I'm already in manual mode. I will start a timer of 10 seconds just to be able to go in front of the camera to draw something in the air. You might have seen that already, but you didn't know how to do that, and that's what I'm going to do now. So that was just an idea what you can do using a longer exposure time. Obviously you can use different light colors as well, which also might look great to get even a better result for all long time exposures. Use a timer, because then you're not touching the camera anymore, because sometimes the camera might be really sensitive once it comes to long time exposures. So for all these kind of shots, I would recommend to use at least a timer of 2 seconds and then start your work. So everyone, I hope you enjoyed watching this short tutorial when it comes to night photography and how you can expose. Obviously there are 100 ways to expose correctly. Let's assume you're shooting like a soccer game or football game during the night. You can't take an exposure time of 30 seconds. Therefore, you need you require an exposure time of a 500 or 1,000 of a second. Therefore, you need a lens with a fast aperture to get in all the available light. And of course, you have to push the ISO also a little bit. And the better the aperture is, or the faster the aperture on your lens is, the bigger the camera sensor is, the better the results. And obviously try to keep the ISO as low as possible, except for the case that you want to have a grainy picture. Maybe for these ones who are shooting portraits with natural light, looks also great. And if you turn on in Adobe Lightroom the filter for black and white, looks also kind of nice. Thank you very much. Make sure to follow me on Instagram and Telegram. All the things I used to record this video are listed in the video description. See you very soon und tschüss.